All right. So this is kind of a new concept of having actual talks with the AGMs, and we just thought of it a couple weeks ago, and Chris and Christian were both good enough to come through with some content at last minute notice. And so I just wanted to do like a more of a fun, just chit-chatty type talk to get everybody warmed up to go to the bar. And again, like Eli said at the start, this is an open forum, so if anybody wants to chime in or interrupt me, feel free to. So I was thinking a lot about, obviously, most of us do a fair amount of automation these days, and I was just thinking about how I started in it, how my goals have changed over the years. And I'm not sure how much you remember back when email was an API, so like swipping domain registration. And as we were a startup ISP, and quickly that was taking a lot of time, and as typically happened with things like that, we would hire an admin type person and nobody thought twice about it until one day we were building something else, and I was like, why don't we just build all this together? So when you click a button to provision, it goes into a database, creates a ticket, and then also registers with Aaron, etc. And fast forward to 2002, when the website traffic was, I think it was getting a lot more. So for instance, we had The Onion for a client, and they had 6 front-end web servers. And 2002, I think the ISP has been sold. In fact, I was just starting one of my first companies and jumped in to help The Onion manage their servers. And they were actually like hand FTPing things to each of the individual 6 servers. So, I mean, that seems trivial and silly now, but back then nobody had really thought of the fact that maybe we should have something to deploy. Instead of taking 10 minutes to deploy when the new issue came out, it was run the script and it's all done. 2006, it's almost funny, this ties into every time we start a new company, and it kind of went to the next generation. I just noticed that. Was a lot of financial stuff with trading engine deployments and 20, 30 servers around the world. And we obviously needed very tight control on source code, very tight control on when things were deployed, like never deploy during market hours, things like that. And it became really important to make sure developers didn't do as they do. And obviously I'm mainly a developer, for those that don't know. So developers always have the habit of getting on a production box and doing things that they shouldn't, which just can't happen in that industry. And so I created Facsimile, which, as it turns out, I didn't know at the time, was remarkably similar to Ansible in that it used YAML and JSON databases. And it would do things like, if you had a crash on a production box, a developer could SSH in, he could get the core file, he could look at the process list, look at the logs, but he couldn't like kill a process or copy code or anything like that. 2010, we took over our own network, which was my first foray into the network automation. And I just inherited a huge, nasty config of multiple VRFs. Each Exchange connection had its own VRF. It was all hand done, so very error prone and everything else. And I just added a quick thing in there so you could push the network config around. I think that's coming to today with things like OpenConfig, which actually define data. So as a data model, there should be no logic or code. An interface is an interface. A VLAN is a VLAN. And it's gaining device support, and it's just kind of the way that I think it should be done, and I think that's probably the way it's going to stay for a while, or similar to that, which is what we're working on now, which will be open source. It's not quite open source yet, but it's kind of combining all those things that we learned along the way and other people we worked with. And people are starting to understand why a single source of truth is so important. And audibility, accountability, orchestrating different automation platforms. So as now automation's caught on enough that people just expect to push a button and have your network get built. And it's more people like, well, now I want to know how you can push the button and when you can push the button and which people can push which buttons, things like that. So I think it's a really kind of an interesting time. And we will see what happens. So, questions or comments? on anything in general. It's kind of a very fast-moving target, which is why it's not open source yet. It's actually in production with a few of my clients. It started out as more of like an Ansible type thing and then turned into more of just like a layer on top of Ansible that will do the automation things, but it also might include user tasks, because there are still things that like the user has to do. In fact, we just put up a test for somebody requested for PeeringDB that there is an online IXF member list editor. So I guess and I know I didn't answer it that well, but it's just to help full accountability into anything that's done with your server's network, anything like that. Anybody else?
All right.
All right, thank you.